Hello, everybody, and welcome to How to Make Better Decisions at Work. Welcome, Graham.
Hi, Ricky. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. Looking forward to unpacking this topic. I know you're really passionate about this topic, and actually, you've been doing some stuff with some of our clients on this recently as well.
Yeah, just really recently, we had a request for a group of about 30, 35 senior managers in an organization where they recognized they could do with some help on decision making. So we've tried to boil what was essentially a day and a half's worth of stuff into 45 minutes to an hour today. Yeah, really interesting at that level. They recognize there was a need to make better decisions, and they will explore what that means as we go through the session today, Ricky.
Brilliant. Well, we've already got Mizanur, if I'm saying that right, who's dialing in from Bangladesh. Awesome. Great to have you on board. And we're going to share some stuff that you can take away, that you can apply instantly. So let's dive in, shall we? So, as we've said, how to make better decisions at work. That's what today is all about. And we're going to give you a perspective, a viewpoint through some of the lenses that we share with our customers all the time. So we're going to really dial into these kind of three key areas, and then we're going to open this up to a Q&A at the end. So we're going to look at what is it that stops us making decisions? What gets in the way? We're going to look at why that happens, and we're going to also look at giving you some practical tools, 3 steps that you can use instantly to make better decisions. And if you're hopefully going to stick around to the end, where we will share how you can access our decision-making toolkit. So there's lots of additional content that we're putting in there for you as well. So hopefully lots for you to take away from today's session.
Interesting, Rick. We've got a question already.
Already? Wow.
Yeah, Ms. has asked us, how in the age of AI, how is decision making becoming a challenging task? What are your takes on AI and decision making and it being challenging, Ricky?
I think it is a potential problem, and I think some of the tools that we're going to share today will help perhaps identify, because the reality is, for a lot of things now, AI can provide you with quite a lot of detail, quite a lot of information. The secret, though, is how do you work out which is the right bit to take forward, which is the right piece of information, data, or insight that you can use to move forward. So I think AI is going to provide some context, but I think it still needs the human angle, the human intervention to kind of go, yes, but there's some experience playing out here. There's some previous ways of doing things that I've either learned from or I've perhaps fallen foul of in the past. So I think AI has got a really important part to play in terms of access to information, but I still think there's a human element that's required to make that crucial decision when it boils down to it at the end. How about you, Graham?
Yeah, well, AI comes up a lot, doesn't it? Increasingly, in terms of whether it's good, bad, or indifferent for various things. I guess as we talk about kind of some of the stuff that stops us from making a decision, or certainly a good decision, that kind of emotional response that we have. I guess the benefit of AI should be it should take away that emotional side of things and present you with the rational side of the argument. But as you say, there's still going to be an ultimate from that rational information. What decision am I going to make from that? And as always with AI, it depends on what you put in, doesn't it? It depends what your prompt is.
Yes.
You know, as with anything, even pre-AI, just with the internet, it's the response you get is only ever going to be as good as the prompt you put in.
So I think for the short term, at least, we still need the human to make some of those choices and those decisions. I think if you're relying totally on AI, you're including quite a lot of risk in terms of interpretation, in terms of whether that data is even valid, up to date.
Yeah.
So we've still got to challenge what it's presenting back to us, and that, of course, is a decision in itself. Do we trust
Yeah.
not. So, okay, we've got these 3 areas. Thank you. Great question. Hopefully we've gone some way to giving you at least a perspective on it. And we're never in a position where we're going, we're right, and that's the way it should be. We have a perspective, and we love debate. We love discussion, because that is where socializing topics like this are really important to help us to create a broader understanding of a topic, and therefore make some choices around what we think is right and what we think is wrong. And guess what? We all have different experiences, and it's the sharing of those which are crucial. So, so thank you very much for that question. So let's, for those that don't know us, Graham and I are part of a company called Thinking Focus. We're a behavioral change business. We work all over the world, but where we really sit is in the sweet spot of where our mindset and our thinking can either be our greatest asset, or it can be our biggest downside in terms of holding us back, limiting us. And we focus in 4 key areas of leadership, culture, change, and productivity. And what we're trying to do is, first and foremost, help people, help teams, help business units get out of their own way so they can be more productive, more effective, and deliver their goals more quickly in terms of that. So we cover a lot of topic, a lot of content in terms of the last year or so of webinars that we've been running. We've covered a lot of topics, in particular around those 4 areas. And you can see the sort of clients that trust us with their people. So, you know, for us, it's all about how do we create this high performance culture by challenging the way we do things. Okay, so what stops us making decisions? Well, I know in my career in particular, I've avoided and I've ducked decisions. Occasionally, that served me well, because I've not rushed into something which, if I did, could have caused untold issues. Because when you react or overreact to situations, that can be problematic. And we're going to tease out some of that in just a moment or two. But I remember I was recruiting area managers to look after my branches, and I couldn't decide what to do. I wasn't sure about one particular candidate. I thought they were awesome, but one of my colleagues who was interviewing with me wasn't showing the same enthusiasm. But by the time I'd pondered my decision, it's too late. Somebody else had snapped them up. So I never got to know whether that decision would have played out in my favor or my colleague's favor, because I just dithered on that particular decision. And I think I lost out on a really, really good individual, which I know, actually, I know them, and they've gone on to greater things. So I think I missed out on somebody because I just couldn't get to the point where I was making a decision. So you're making decisions all the time, right? And you've probably been making quite a few already today. So this is a little bit of interaction. What we'd like to do is encourage you to use your mobile device or browser and join our poll here, which is slido.com #TFWebinars. And what I'm interested in is how many decisions do you think you've made so far today? How many? So you can use that QR code, you can use the web address and give us a perspective in terms of how many decisions do you think you've made so far today? We've got people joining the, oh, we got somebody who says 50. Probably hundreds. I think that's fair. 25. 50, very specific. 50.
Yeah. That's somebody who's gone, I wonder how many I've made, and has then gone and counted them.
Well, the fact that they've 200. So we've got lots of a lot of variety and a big spread in terms of, you know, probably hundreds. It's probably more than 200 in terms of that, but 25 to probably hundreds. Well, the actual fact is, on an average day, the average person is making 35,000 decisions in a day. Now, just imagine if you had to make all of those decisions consciously. I know that if that were me, I probably wouldn't be able to sleep. Wouldn't be able to wake up for at least a month. The cognitive brain power involved in making that many decisions. And I think when you think about it, actually, there are lots of decisions we're making. We're making some really important decisions, like how to invest your life savings, whether or not to trust somebody, how to respond to an email from somebody that has probably got you a little hot under the collar. They've probably hit a nerve that's causing you to perhaps react. And then you've got, and I'm saying this advisedly, whether, what coffee to order, let alone what size, but also what type of coffee. Is it an iced coffee? Is it a frappuccino? Is it, there's a whole range of these things now. And I'm just thinking about the Starbucks one that's in front of us here. But actually, then you've got, do I pick another coffee provider like Costa, for example? Or, and Graham, yours is not about coffee. It's about which type of tea, isn't it?
Tea, yeah. Yeah.
And then,
have
of course,
a selection of teas?
Well, if they've not got a selection, that kind of limits your options, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But everything from what we're going to have for dinner, what we're going to have, what we're going to wear, whether it's an important event, that might increase the importance of a decision. And I know that certainly of an evening, my wife and I tend to have a few choice words, because my wife's like, I don't want to make any more decisions. I'm fed up of deciding what we have for tea, which is great, because I'm not that particularly bothered what we have for tea. I'm a very simple kind of guy, until you make a suggestion and then she goes, I don't fancy that, which makes it really hard to kind of win when she wants you to make a decision. You make a decision and actually it's not what she wants to eat. So therefore, I kind of feel like I can't win. How about you, Graham?
Well, yeah, we have some of that. I guess our biggest decision we have is we like to, of an evening, if we're all at home, sit down and watch something as a family. So as you know, kind of there's 4 of us in the house, 8 ranging from Freddie, who's 11, Evie, who's 15, up to kind of the pair of us as parents. And when we come to an end of a series, for me, it's that this is going to take us another night just to work out what we're going to watch. So we go through the recommended, because if you've enjoyed this, you'll enjoy that. And then we have to look at, is it age appropriate? And sometimes it's age appropriate, but it might be a little bit too scary for Freddie. We go through all these things. So, as a family trying to make a decision, sometimes that adds a lot of time into the process, and you multiply that from a work point of view. The more people you engage, the longer your decision is likely to take. That's probably our biggest one. We do have the one about dinner. What you fancy dinner? How about this? No, I don't want that. We do have some of that, but the TV one I think is interesting in terms of the trying to get 4 people's views on something that we're all happy to sit down and watch, and all 4 of us need to be happy to watch it. That's the other kind of agreement we've got in the house. Yeah,
which kind of limits it quite a lot. It certainly does, because my son Freddie, who's also Freddie, like your son, if he's got the attention span that's so small, he'll watch something on Netflix and he's constantly scrubbing through on the timeline and going, I was listening to that, and he's moving it forward because his threshold is just so short.
Yeah. But we have a default. If we can't make a decision, Freddie would go back to something he's watched before because he knows he enjoys it.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So let's look at some of the challenges then that get in the way of making decisions. And we've kind of highlighted 5 key areas. Now, clearly there are more, but when things aren't clear, it's a real challenge. It's a real problem. When decision rights, who owns the authority to make this decision? And when you lack clarity, actually, you're either going to stall or you're going to escalate. You're either going to push it up the channel, up the food chain to make a decision, get your boss to get involved in that decision. And that's not always a good use of time. So, Harvard Business Review would talk about autonomy it's kind of the raw fuel of an innovation culture. So we really do need to help our people make decisions and give them the autonomy and authority to make those decisions. We might need to put some boundaries around it, but when they don't make decisions, you create friction, you create delays, you create problems for your people to kind of move forward with confidence because they're not quite sure whether they can make this call. And that kind of leads into perhaps low psychological safety, because if psychological safety is limited, we don't feel like people around us and our boss have our backs, then we're probably going to hold back, we're going to withdraw, and that inevitably is going to lead to a real impact on decision-making speeds. And it's this agility that is kind of a competitive advantage. But if we're creating an environment where people find it hard, if we create an environment where people don't feel comfortable to do that, they won't make decisions, they'll hold back, and that slows everything down. And then you've got information poverty. In other words, are we providing accurate data, real-time data? Are we providing data that is just overwhelming, perhaps, that we're giving people everything and letting them work out what's important, when the reality is there's probably a few key metrics that are important. So let's make sure that they're getting that data, they're getting it as quickly, as real time as possible in order to enable them to make proper real-time decisions. Because if they're making decisions on data that's a week old, a month old, then inevitably that's bringing that decision, that choice into question. I know I've suffered from this, certainly in my career, is this conflicting or muddy KPIs where it seems like I can win, but my success actually is in conflict with yours, Graham, and you can't win.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there is that. And you know, I think about those kind of 5 you got there as well. And the one for me, I remember, wasn't necessarily foggy decision rights, but decision rights where it's relatively clear what people should do, but actually almost a level set too low. So sometimes you can have people who could make a really good decision, but they feel that the decision rights don't allow them to do that, and that could stifle people making decisions as well. We hear the psychological safety one a lot working with clients, don't we, where people are afraid of making a decision in essence, because it's what happens if I make the wrong decision? What does that mean for me?
Yeah, and that probably is a nice segue into skills and confidence gaps, because how many times have we promoted the best engineer, the best nurse, the best sales rep, put them in a leadership position, but we haven't given them the frameworks in order to make decisions.
Yeah.
So they're either making decisions that they're not authorized to make, or they're not thinking them through properly, or not making them at all, because they're kind of going, I'm not sure. And of course, that will impact their confidence. It will impact in terms of confidence in them, as well as their confidence to make it in terms of a decision. So there's a number of reasons why we're holding back from making decisions. We either don't believe we've got the authority, we don't feel safe, we don't have the data or the real-time data to make that, or actually we can make this decision, but it's going to cause a problem over here, or we don't feel able or confident to make those decisions. So Graham, why does this happen?
Yeah, so let's explore this a little bit. Let's first of all, back on our phones, there's a question on the screen for you. Just a really quick response in terms of the bat and ball response. So what you'll see is a question you may have come across before, in terms of you've got a bat and a ball costing £1.10. The bat costs £1 more than the ball. How much, therefore, does the ball cost? Is it 10 pence? Is it £1? Is it 5 pence?
And you're on the timer as well here as well, aren't they?
Timer on, running down on the timer. And time's up.
Oh, I think we might have been too quick.
I think you're right. It might be too quick on that. Let's play around with that though, in terms of the responses that we had there, and in terms of from a decision making point of view, why sometimes we get it wrong. It's an interesting this question. I see it quite a lot, pops from social media quite a lot, and I always kind of think I know what the response should be, but there's a bit of me goes, I'm going to make a really quick kind of decision around this, and then always get it wrong. The instant thing we think about with this question is it must be 10 pence. It must be 10 pence because if it costs £1 more, it's £1, and 10 pence makes £1.10. The reality is it's not. It's the 5 pence is the response you're looking for, because if it costs £1 more, then it would cost £1.05 plus the 5 pence makes it £1.10. But the reason why we get this kind of decision often wrong is because what's happening is how we engage our brain. And there are two types of thinking at play typically for us when we make decisions. So we talk about them in terms of system 1 and system 2. Sometimes it's called red brain, sometimes it's called blue brain. If you've come across the chimp paradox, it's chimp and human. They have different labels, but essentially what happens is our system 1, the one shown in red on the screen, is our fast, what we call an emotional response. So that's what happens with the bat and the ball. We see it equals £1.10, therefore it's got to be £1. That's the quick response that we make. We're not thinking it through. And where we have system 1 responses, we usually use it for things that are habitual, it's unconscious. So when you quoted the 35,000 decisions earlier, Ricky, a lot of those we won't be aware that we're making. So every time we go to a door, as an example, we don't think about opening the door, but we're all making a decision about, is it a push or is it a pull? And we base on whether it's got a handle or a faceplate on the door. So we make really quick responses, and the system 1 does that for us. And it's around kind of 95% of our responses, we start with system 1 and we go straight into that. The downside is that these emotional fast responses often are error prone, and we'll talk about kind of what error prone means in a moment. System 2 is much slower. It's much more rational for us. It's effortful. It's logical. It's conscious. So from that point of view, when we're thinking about making decisions, how can we help ourselves move from that system 1, that fast thinking, into more of our system 2 and our slow thinking? Now let's look at system 1 in terms of where perhaps it does work for us and it can be helpful. And there are kind of a few areas where it is good for us. So we can make good decisions with system 1 thinking where familiarity is high. So if we're dealing with routine tasks or skills that we're well versed in the skill, system 1 is very efficient for us. So for instance, if we're driving down the road and we're an experienced driver, we'll see things ahead of us and we'll react to them almost before they happen. It doesn't feel conscious because we've spotted a potential danger ahead of us and we responded accordingly. And it's interesting kind of when I've got the kids in the car and the kids ask questions about driving and why you do certain things. And sometimes you almost struggle to explain why you've done it, but it's just based on experience. It's familiarity. I know what to look out for on the roads. So system 1 can work well where we've got high familiarity. It can work well where there are patterns and trends. So for instance, if we're looking at detecting emotions from facial expressions of people that we know really well. So that for us is a good example. You know, when your partner walks in from work, you take one look at the face and you go, something's not right, something's happened at work today. So again, it's good for those in those kind of situations because there's a clear pattern based on stuff that we've seen previously. That might even be identifying a friend or a colleague, someone you know well, in a crowded room or kind of a crowded place. The system 1 thinking works really well if we've got time constraints. So we're up against pressure. So system 1 helps us make rapid decisions. So again, an example could be, imagine a firefighter who's entered a building and they've done it multiple times, so they know what they're looking out for. and they get that feeling that now's the time I have to leave the building because it's becoming unsafe. So again, there's a great pressure on the time side of things, great time constraints, instant decisions made, so it can be useful for that. Useful if you've got high levels of expertise. One of the things we talk about is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So if you feel you've got mastery in something, experts, excuse me, experts often develop almost like an intuitive decision making. It's actually based on their experience. We talk about having a gut feel for something, but gut feels really just based on we've got lots and lots of experience in the field, and therefore we can make a quick decision, and that decision tends to hold true in terms of us feeling it's a good decision. If you play chess, chess grandmasters, for instance, they can recognize, like if their opponent's made a stronger move or a weaker move, they just see the move and they recognize what it is. So it works really well where we've got expertise involved, and it can be useful as a low stake decision. So if there's not really any risk or very, very low risk involved with it, minimal consequences, then that system one can be really useful for us. So I'm going to use your picking a meal example, Ricky. Picking a meal at a restaurant is typically a good example of where system one can be helpful for us. Perhaps not if you're out with your partner, because sometimes it's like I quite often look at a menu and I know very quickly what I'm going to have. My wife not so much, and then we go through the whole. If I've chosen, say, a pie on the menu and she likes a pie, well, if I get the pie and she doesn't, what if my pie looks better than what she's chosen? So I've made a really quick decision because I've gone, oh yeah, I'm going to have a pie today, whereas she can take much longer around it. Whereas I go, it doesn't really matter because it's a low stake decision, and what's the worst that can happen in those situations? So system one can be good for us in a number of situations. But as we mentioned before, it can be error prone. So a few things we need to be kind of mindful of in these situations. There are some cognitive things for us to think about. There are some emotional things for us to think about. Situation is clearly going to come into play, and there are some psychological factors that can either help or hold us back from making decisions. So let's dive in and have a look at each of these. Let's start with cognitive. So one of the cognitive factors that can affect us, Ricky mentioned earlier about information, actually information overload. Sometimes we have too much information. So when we're trying to move from this fast system one thinking, we might search out information, but what if there's too much? What if there are too many options for us? And too many options, too much data can overload our brain, which then makes it hard for us to choose. We end up with what we call analysis paralysis. We overthink every possible outcome. And in fairness, our son's a little bit like this. You can see him sometimes overthinking things, putting kind of more pressure on himself than perhaps he needs to in certain situations. And analysis paralysis, as the term suggests, can lead to inaction. We perhaps have a fear of making a mistake. That's kind of a cognitive response that we've got. We worry about choosing the wrong option. So the best way of not choosing the wrong option is not to choose any option at all. Or we look for perfectionism. We want the outcome to be perfect. And of course, trying to seek perfectionism can delay or can block how we make decisions. And another one, and maybe this ties a little bit with your skill one from earlier, Rick, as well, is we've got low confidence. And sometimes that's because we don't feel we have the skills. But if we doubt our own ability to make a good choice, again, we can tend to avoid it. So there are a few things from a cognitive point of view, from a thinking point of view, that come into play when we're making decisions that can help us, but actually can hold us back. If we then move on to think about things from an emotional point of view, so our emotions do come into play. You know, we're typically tribe animals. We want to be part of the tribe. Our emotions are important to us. So a fear of judgment, a fear of other people judging us, can stop us from making decisions. You know, we're concerned about how other people might perceive the decision that we've just made. That might lead to, or we may be also experiencing anxiety or stress. So if we've got a high emotional state, we're feeling very anxious about something, we're feeling very stressed about making a decision, that can cloud our judgment. And again, it either reduces the clarity or our fight, flight, or freeze kicks in, and we freeze and we don't make a decision. Then there's something we call regret aversion. So actually what we're trying to do is we're trying to avoid a regret in the future. We're trying to avoid us making a decision that down the line will come to regret. So those kind of things can make us hesitant to commit to things. And again, these things, if we can manage them, and we'll talk a bit about how we can manage some of these things later, can be helpful, but actually can stop us from making good decisions. The third element, the situational piece, again, ties in with some stuff Ricky talks about, a lack of clarity. If we don't have clear goals in a certain situation, if we don't have a clear sense of purpose, how do we know which options we need to evaluate? Because I think it's Alice in Wonderland quote where she's asking the I think it's the Cheshire Cat which way to go, and he goes, where do you want to get to? And she's like, I don't know. He goes, well, any path will take you there then. So a lack of clear purpose, a lack of clear goals, we struggle to make a decision. We might have conflicting advice. Input from others can be helpful, but can also be confusion, a bit like my choosing what to watch with the family. Time pressure, we feel rushed. So in situations where you have to make a quick decision, a bit like the bat and ball example earlier, that can lead to us making a decision, but that decision being a poor choice, or again, we just don't want to make a decision. And there might be some external constraints. That might be in an organization. There might be some financial constraints. There might be some legal constraints that are going to hold us back, or there can be some social limitations. If we make a decision and it's not seen to be socially acceptable, therefore that stops us from moving forwards. And then the final one, thinking about kind of from a psychological point of view. So we've talked about avoiding decisions, avoidance behavior. We avoid decisions because it means we don't have to take any responsibility. And if we haven't taken any responsibility, we don't have any discomfort down the line. The challenge if we're managing and leading teams is we can create something that we call learned helplessness. So what happens is we can, when we're working with people, if there's kind of past failures, if we've been working with people and things have failed in the past, or they've not been able to resolve things, then we create almost a learned helplessness in people, a belief that decisions won't make a difference, and therefore they come to us as managers, as leaders, to make those decisions because they don't want to do them themselves. And it can be one actually around our identity confusion, not knowing really who we are in any given situation. So who am I to make this kind of decision? Why is my input important? So not knowing who we are, or not knowing what we can value, or what we value, can make decisions difficult to make because they feel meaningless. So a few things there, Rick, I think that are interesting from a decision point of view, particularly where we want to make a quick decision, but it's not always going to work for us. And those 4 areas that can hold us back from making a decision.
I think the one that resonates with me, certainly in the work that we do with lots of our clients, is this learned helplessness. We don't realize as leaders the impact we have on our people. So when somebody makes a decision, makes a choice, our response will determine whether they feel like they can make another decision, or a more, perhaps something that takes them a little bit more involvement and a little bit more stretch in order to make that decision. And if we react or respond in the wrong way, if we question, perhaps with the wrong tone, we develop this learned helplessness in people. And I know that's not intended, but often we're doing it because we're protecting ourselves as leaders, because we don't want to be caught out for our team making a wrong decision and us having to answer for that with our seniors. So these things are all interconnected. And often, system 1, as Graham's described, is there to protect us. It's there to keep us safe. It doesn't discern right, wrong, or indifferent. It just makes a decision in the moment that it believes is going to keep us safe from harm. And of course, when we're feeling under pressure, we're releasing chemicals, and our biochemistry is starting to go off the charts. And as Graham talked about, the chimp is starting to make some decisions for us. And the chimp is a lot stronger than the human, which is the rational, the system 2 side of the brain, which goes, well, hang on a minute, it's okay, it's just a webinar, it's fine, we've done them before, let's just relax. So all of those things will play out. And it's interesting how the simplest things can often create some triggers, and often it's our self-defense mechanisms that we then project on others and cause this learned helplessness or this avoidance behavior in others. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that kind of the fight, flight, freeze kind of reflex that we have. I think the thing that fascinates me about it is perhaps physically we've evolved over time. You know, we're living very differently now than we did when those things, if you like, were developed in our brains. But that's still there. It's almost like that bit of us hasn't moved on, and that challenge between, you know, it recognizes there's a threat to us, you know, and way back when that threat might have been, you know, a lion or a tiger was going to eat us. But it's almost like it's going, well, that was back then, and that's not the situation anymore. But I have to stand up and do a presentation in front of the board, and suddenly it's oh, that's just the same thing as something's going to eat you, and that's, you know, from a cognitive or a psychological point of view, that bit of our brain kicks in. And I find that fascinating that we're so far down the line still, but our brain almost can't distinguish from a system 1 point of view the difference between something might eat you and, you know, presenting doing a presentation to the board. Whether down the line, whether another, you know, so many thousand years that will have disappeared as we realize the threats aren't quite as they used to be, I think will be interesting, but not that we'll be around for that, Ricky. But
no, but or AI starts to make some of these some of these elements easier for us. But it is interesting how what makes us different from the rest of the animal kingdom is the upgrade that we got that gave us this ability to think and solve problems the way that we do. And I know our animals do that too, but we've still share that primitive brain that makes these very quick, almost instant decisions to protect us in the moment in the best way that it sees that it can. So essentially, system 2 is where we really want to start thinking and playing if we want to make more robust decisions. You know, like Graham said, opening the door, system 1 will take care of that. It's already worked it out, it's normalized it, and we know what to do. That is until, I don't know about you, Graham, but every time I turn up, even if it says pull, I push, and if it says push, I pull, and I look like I'm wrestling with the door for at least a couple of seconds until I figure out, oh, yes, it does say that, doesn't it? So even then
they're throwing in doors that open themselves. I mean, that's a whole other thing we've got to deal with.
And you take a step back because you're not expecting it, don't you?
Yeah.
So let's have a look at 3 things we can do then. 3 things we can do practically that will help you to kind of take a pause from that system 1 instant decision making and start to be a bit more perhaps reflective, a bit more thoughtful about how we go about making those decisions. So we've got three ways of doing that. And of course, you know, this is a massive topic, but we're just offering you 3 practical things here. So step 1, it's all about decision pause. So we've got a number of factors here around clarifying the call. What is the decision or what is the problem we're actually trying to make here? And often our system 1 brain goes off thinking it's this, I've seen it before, I know what to do. And then we go, oh, no, it's not that. And we have to back up and we have to start again. So let's start by going, what is the problem we're actually trying to solve? And then it's about going, so what do we know for sure? What are we making up? What are we assuming? What has come about? And we're trying to process it. So in other words, map the facts and the fog. Let's surface the frame breakers. What are the things that are causing us to go down a particular route? which are tripping us up and perhaps taking us in a system one route where we're making instant decisions versus going, okay, how does that play out? Is that the right course of action? Almost perhaps even testing some of those things before we go for it. Thinking about the people side, who's involved in this decision? Who should be involved in this decision? Who else would have a perspective that if we were to ask them, would make this decision even more robust? And then there's an element that trips everybody up, particularly around bias and learning. You know, what are the guide rails that are playing to here? So there's lots of organizations that will make decisions. In fact, if you think, one of the examples in the preparing for this webinar we looked at was the Netflix went to Blockbuster in 2000 and offered them Blockbuster for $50 million. And you're thinking, wow, now that's got to be the worst decision in the world, because it's worth something like 552 billion today. Well, of course, they were using a map of the world that was based on video. It was based on VHS. It was based on you coming to a shop to take away your cassette. And actually their business model was really benefiting from people returning their videos late. So they didn't want to lose control of some of those things. So their confirmation bias that their model was the right model was tripping them up. And actually it caused them to make a decision that I think everyone would go, knowing what we know now. And of course, that in itself is a bias, because hindsight bias makes that decision look worse. But we weren't there to make that original decision. So we don't know what the facts were when they were considering that as a potential decision.
And we see loads of it's like not signing the Beatles and all those, isn't it? Those decisions go, how can someone not have made that decision? But at the time,
what was there was Pete Best, who was the drummer before Ringo, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you're thinking, wow, that seems like a really good decision. But of course, hindsight, at the time, he would have had his frame of reference that would have said, this is not going to work. It's not right for me. And I've made that decision. Now, I don't know how he thought about it, but you've got to imagine there's some regret playing out in terms of that. So we've played that decision pause checklist into a series of key questions to ask, why they matter, and some top tips. Now, I'm not expecting you to read this, and it isn't designed as a very good slide for something like a webinar, but what it is, we've built this into the decision making toolkit that we're going to share with you at the very end. So everybody who's registered for this particular session will get access to the decision pause checklist. And they are not an extensive set of questions. They're just designed to help you pause and perhaps consider the decision that you're making in a little bit more detail. In other words, make better decisions at work. And then we've got think creatively.
Yeah, and I think that the creative piece for me is a really interesting one. I mean, and, you know, we worked a lot on creativity over the years, Ricky, with people. I find creativity a really interesting thing that if we've paused, and there is that assumption, let's assume we have paused, one of the things that can help us make a better decision is to kind of take the frame and reframe where we are, and to build in a degree of creative thinking. And I think people we've worked with in the past, I think they think that creativity is like a mystic art, and it's in the realm of only a few people. The reality is we can all think creatively and we can all do it really, really easily. But a few things we need to do. We need to define our desired future state first of all. So do we know where it is we're aiming for? Do we know what it is we're trying to achieve, as we've mentioned a couple of times already today? If we have a problem, can we define that problem as a desired outcome? So moving the problem to a solution, turning our desired outcome, therefore, into a solution-focused question. You know, so and there are loads of examples kind of where this might help. But again, quite often people get stuck in the problem, and if we're stuck in the problem, we struggle then to engage our creative thinking. But there's some really simple things around questions. We probably know loads about open and close and all that kind of thing, but starting questions with what, how, and who can be really helpful. They're really good words. because they're opening up the question that follows, including words like could or might or possibly, engage our brain a little bit differently. They're encouraging us to be a bit more creative. So when we're thinking about reframing, can we think about reframing our problem or into a question that's going to help us generate a number of ideas? So, like the example on the screen, we've highlighted the use of the word how and the could and the possibly. So rather than getting stuck into a cycle of going, oh my God, we'll get too many customer complaints and this, that, and the other. Actually, if we turn that into how could we possibly reduce the number of customer complaints, turn that into a question, answer that question a number of different ways. And we always encourage you to go aim for at least 20, but give yourself 5 minutes, 6, 7, 8 minutes max, and just create a list of ideas. And what we find really interesting with this, particularly if you're working as a team, is how quickly you generate a volume of ideas. And creativity for us it's about quantity, not quality. We can get into quality when we're starting to define things and looking at, okay, we've got these, I've got these 20 ideas. Which of these 20 ideas am I going to work on? But typically what we find is, I don't know what to say, Ricky, the first 5 or 6 are probably the safe and sound ideas, are things that maybe we've even tried before. We start to get a bit more creative as we get into double digits. We get to 12 and 13, we feel like perhaps we're pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone a bit more now. And then we start to get into the whatever the right phrase is, but the wild and wacky ideas. And we can do that, individuals can do that really easily. But if we're stuck in, we're getting too many customer complaints, we're not going to move forward. If we can turn that into a question, how could we possibly reduce the number of complaints, answer it a number of times, from there we moved into a more rational thinking space straight away. We then just need to work out, okay, so from those responses, which ones are the ones that we're going to take forward? And again, no great surprise, we've got some thoughts that can help you think about that. So we've done the decision pause piece, we've thought creatively, we've generated the ideas around that, and then we just move into how do we critically evaluate those things. So Ricky, what tips have you got for us on this?
Well, as consultants, I think it's well known we love a 2x2, right? So
who doesn't love a 2x2?
so the reality is that if you're anything like me, when you come up with a good idea or a solution, you get really, really enthusiastic. You get, you feel good about it. The problem is that I've probably developed a preference and a liking for my idea. So if Graham was to come up with an idea, I'm going, well, yeah, but I came up with this idea and I really like my idea. And we get what's known as an endowment effect, where we're starting to value something that's either ours or that we've created higher than anything else. So we're actually starting to kick in with bias that's getting in our way. And one of the best ways we've come across it, from a practical standpoint at least, to overcome preference or bias is to use a 2x2 grid. Because what it's doing is it's using 2 competing factors to minimize the effect of bias. Like authority bias you might get when the boss's idea comes out. So when you've done that creative thinking, if you do it like a lot of our clients do it before we work with them, in that it's either on a whiteboard or a flip chart, and the boss says something, all of a sudden the boss's idea counts for more because there's an authority linked to their idea. We think they know better, we assume, because they're in charge, and therefore we probably then withdraw and we probably just jump on the bandwagon of that particular idea. So what 2x2 does essentially is go, right, well, let's give it at least 2 criteria that we're going to evaluate our decisions on. One of the most popular ones that is out there is what's known as the Eisenhower matrix. Now, the Eisenhower matrix can also be known as urgency versus importance. And what this does effectively starts to give you some criteria by which you're making some decisions. So something that's urgent important is probably the stuff that you seem to be doing every day. If it's urgent and not important, then this is the stuff you're doing because someone important is asking you to do this, or they're making a fuss about it. Something that's important but not urgent is something that you perhaps really should be doing. And important, not important, and not urgent, why on earth is it even on your list to start with? So what this is trying to do is effectively work out on our to-do list what really matters. And it's using importance and urgency as a way of making that decision. So that then plays out in terms of do it now, delegate it, delete it, get rid of it, or decide when. So if something's on your to-do list and it's been on your to-do list for quite some time, it's probably telling you you're never going to get round to it. And what the Eisenhower matrix is a really good example of a 2x2 that does 2 criteria, helps to remove some of that bias, that preference. But I like doing this spreadsheet stuff, or I like doing this customer service type stuff. It doesn't matter. Is it the highest value contribution? And the Eisenhower matrix will help you to make that choice. And then there's a whole range of these. Here's just a few of them. Risk likelihood from the bottom there, urgency versus importance. We just talked about cost and benefit. And we love one, which is ease versus impact. So how easy is this idea to implement, and what's the impact? And what you're really looking for is something that's really easy with high impact. And if you can get it into that box, then that's really saying, let's get on with this, because it's going to give us a really good bang for our buck. But of course, you might have a 2x2 that you use, in which case that's great, because it's causing you to have to make some choices, some decisions about your ideas. So take that list of 20 ideas that you've created, or more, one would hope, and then start to slot them in the boxes that are relevant to the type of decision that you're making, whether it's risk likelihood, cost benefit, urgency versus important. It could also be around people's attitude and energy in terms of the way in which they're getting involved or on board with some of those things. The only thing limiting you in terms of a 2x2 really is imagination.
Yeah, I think what I like about these, Ricky, again, regardless of the one that you use, but the benefit of it's just 2x2. It's, you could have 3x3 or 4x4, but it's suddenly the bigger you go, the more decisions you need to make. You literally go in, and we do this with groups, don't we? We kind of post-it notes and flips and that, and you go, so if you've got this post-it note, in which box does it go? And as a team, we can have a decision around it. And I think the value of the 2x2 is that we think about what we just talked about with analysis paralysis and all that kind of stuff. It essentially stops that, because you kind of go, it's got to go in one of these 4 spaces. Now, which one does it go in, and why? And of course, all we're trying to do with all these things is go, how can we calm our chimp down, move away from that emotional system 1 response? How can we engage system 2? How can we give it more structure? How can we make it a more rational response? And all these things certainly help us to get there.
Absolutely. And I think that leads us nicely into the kind of giveaway that we've got available. So I will be emailing everybody who's registered for the session. We'll be sharing this decision toolkit. So you've got your decision pause kind of matrix, if you like. What's the lens we're looking through, and what are the key questions, the creative thinking stuff. So we've built in here a couple of thinking tools for you, and you'll notice that there's a YouTube video that attaches to that to help you to use that and get the most value out of it. All of our tools are designed to be high impact, low effort. You still need to make some big decisions, and I think using tools like this allows you to socialize them with others, allows you to sit down, and you can then have a debate whether it fits in that box or not. And that's entirely your gift. You get to decide. And ultimately, that debate, that socialization will help you to make even better decisions around that. So we've got a rating matrix here and stuff like that, as well as some videos and podcasts that will support some of this stuff as well. So from our perspective, we've covered today, we've covered what stops us making decisions. We've covered why it happens. And we've given you 3 practical tools to make better decisions, starting from how do we take a pause and be clear about what we're trying to do here? How do we then reframe that in a more creative, solution-focused way before then going, so what we're going to do then? And having some criteria by which we make those decisions. And that leads us nicely into the Q&A.
I think while we're waiting for see if there are any additional questions, Ricky, I think the one thing for me that stands out with all this is where you can make a quick decision, where you've got enough information to do it. I'm going to go back to me looking at the menu in a restaurant going, yes, this is what I'm going to have. You don't need all this stuff, but it's where you find, I don't sit down with a 4x4 matrix and plot where what I'm going to burger or a pie and all those kind of things. We're not talking about kind of building that level in for those quick decisions. We're talking about where you feel there's value in taking a pause before you make the decision, in thinking creatively, in getting that down into some critical thinking. It's what situations could that stuff be helpful for you and your team, and it's not designed. The phrase we use a lot, Ricky, is that this is not about doing it quick. This is about slowing you down to speed you up.
Yes.
It's about building the pause in, slowing down our thinking, allowing the rational thinking to kick in to allow us to make a better decision. Not always going to get it right. Even with these tools and techniques, we're not always going to get it right, but it allows us to make a much better decision.
And I think for me, the lessons when you are leading people, these are great tools to coach them with. So getting them to do the work and then working through what the outputs of them are. So one of the challenges you get with creative thinking is people will almost think of an idea, process whether it's real, whether it's worthwhile, and almost dismiss it before they start. So it never makes it on the page. And that process is then compromised because you're not really allowing your brain the freedom to go, so what could we do? If anything were possible, what might that be? And that actually might lead you somewhere else as well. So you almost create this snowball effect of one idea leads to another idea, leads to another idea. And before you know it, something might emerge that is highly valuable. And then by being able to take your work and sit down with a colleague, a friend, or your boss, your line manager, and go, here's my thinking. Because now we can have a conversation about not whether my idea is right or wrong, but whether I've missed something important, whether I don't have access to information that they do, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and just I've kept them down the chat. There's no further questions, Ricky. So nothing's popped in there.
Okay, so and we're almost out of time. I think, as well.
Yeah.
So let's just move that on.
Just got a question that's just dropped in about trust. Trust the leaders is decreasing day by day, I believe. What should a leader do to regain trust from the workforce for better decisions at work? See, I'm going to answer this by not answering it, going, there could be a whole webinar on that, Ricky.
There could, absolutely.
And there wasn't there? Did we not?
We did do a webinar on trust, absolutely. And I think, Ms. Nur, you're absolutely right that if you look at some of the Gallup work in terms of this area, they are showing a decline in trust in that workplace. But I think if we can raise the bar in terms of how we make decisions and have a mechanism for externalizing the thought processes that we're using, that in itself will help to raise trust. It's where we don't know, we make lots of leaps around. We imagine they know more than they're sharing. We imagine that they've got an agenda, and we start to create a narrative that's really unhealthy and unhelpful. So I think, actually using some of these tools, we can start to share and externalize some of that thinking, which will lead us ultimately to better decisions around and about. So great question. But I think Graham's right. Check out the webinar on trust, which was earlier in the year, and you'll find that on our YouTube, our lives that we've done in the past. And then always point out, we have loads of resources available. We've got a YouTube channel, 110,000 plus subscribers on that. We've got a newsletter that comes out every month. And we've also got our LinkedIn channel as well. You can follow us, subscribe to all of those, and get access to all of the great content that Graham and I and the rest of the team share around and about. So it's all free, so make the most of it. And then from our perspective, normally we do these monthly, but we are going to take August off, mainly because most of you will be sunning yourselves somewhere, or at least taking a little bit of time out, I hope, from work. So thank you very much for tuning in, and look out for future webinars coming up later in the year.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much.